Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Progress. Studying tactics, endgames, the classics and your own games is what's important to become a better chess player. I want to thank you for sending me your own games. I've got quite a few of them. And on this channel I want to do 2 videos a week on Mondays and Thursdays. And because I have so many of your games, I will do analyze one of your games a week. And then the other video will be about either tactics, endgames or the classics. This is the first video about the classics. Let's look at a game from the great Bobby Fischer. This is Bobby Fischer, the 11th world champion who held the title from 1972 till 1975. He was an American and he single-handedly defeated the whole Soviet chess empire in the early 70s. Let's look at a game from him. This is a game that Fischer played as a 17-year-old against Fischer-Gadia. It was played in Mar del Plata in Argentina on the 31st of March 1960. Fischer white, Gadia black. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, we have an open Sicilian, c takes, knight takes, bishop f6, knight c3, a6, the Najdorf variation. Fischer's favorite move for his whole life against this variation is bishop c4. This variation should have been named after him, but it isn't. e6, bishop b3, b5, Bobby castled, and bishop b7. This is a moment where you can say, well, can black not win a pawn by playing, instead of bishop b7, b5, b4, attacking the knight, and the knight is protecting that pawn on e4. Well, let's have a look. Knight a4, knight takes the unprotected pawn, but then there's rook e1 attacking the knight, d5 defending the knight, and bishop f4. And this is good compensation for the pawn. It's a variation that is playable for black, but it is a bit dangerous to take the pawn, as was known in theory, and Gadia did not go for it. As said, he played bishop b7. Fischer played f4, knight c6, and Fischer decided to swap those knights. Knight takes, bishop takes, and then f4, f5. e6, e5 was the reply by Gadia, and queen d3. Bishop e7, bishop g5. Now when you play up the f-pawn with white and you have castled your king on the king side, you always have to look for checks if they are not dangerous. This is a typical check, queen b6 check with the f2 pawn gone. Those moves you see a lot. So often players play king g1 to h1 before, do not have to worry about that check anymore. But in this case, Fischer played king h1 after the check was given. Gadia castled and bishop takes f6. That's quite an instructive move. An important square on the board here is the d5 square, and white is looking at that d5 square with queen, knight and bishop. And with bishop takes f6, he takes away a defender of the d5 square, so he gets more control over that square. Gadia took back with the bishop, and Fischer immediately occupies that d5 square, bishop d5. Rook a c8, and now Fischer took on c6. And by doing that, after the rook took back, Fischer has now total control over d5. That's why he swapped on f6, and that's why he swapped a piece on c6. Rook a d1, rook fc8, and now the knight comes to d5. Bobby Fischer's game are good study material because his play is in many games crystal clear. His strategy is very clear and simple. Well, apparently simple. What Fischer has achieved here by those two exchanges is that he has now a strong knight versus a bad bishop. That bishop on f6 is looking at its own pawns. It's almost like a pawn itself. It doesn't have a lot to do. It doesn't have a lot of influence on the game. While the knight on d5 is a beautiful piece. Centralized, it cannot be attacked by pawns or by other minor pieces, and it's covering a lot of ground. So white is better here. Also tactically, knight d5 is a good move. The c2 pawn looks vulnerable with those two rooks on the c-file, but black does not have time to take on c2 because at this moment his queen is hanging, so he first has to do something about that. Gadia played queen d8, saving the queen, and then Fischer simply played c2, c3 to avoid black taking the pawn on c2. And here Gadia played bishop e7. This is a good moment to give you a quote from the book Chess Strategy for Club Players by the Dutch international master Herman Groten. He writes here, Fischer wrote, "This is the kind of position I get in my dreams. A first glance at the position shows that white has a firm grip on the position. Let's see if we can sum up the specific features. 1. White has a strong knight versus a weak bishop for black. 2. This is thanks to the strong central square d5, which has been irreparably weakened by black. 3. White has slightly more space on the king side, mainly because of the far advanced pawn on f5, and he can play for an attack on the king. 4. The white pieces are well centralized and more active than their black colleagues. 5. Black has a little more space on the queen side thanks to the advance b7, b5. 6. Black hopes to activate his rook on the c-file, either via pressure on the e4 pawn or by pushing b5, b4, in order, after c3 takes b4, to penetrate on c2 with one of his rooks. Quite instructive, this position, so white is slightly better, and here Fischer could have played f5, f6, and if then Gadia takes with the bishop, the knight takes back and g takes f6, then we can say that black's pawn structure in front of his king has been shattered, but he has been relieved of his biggest problem, which was his bad bishop. So white is better here, but he has done black a favor by making sure he got rid of his bad piece. That was an option for Fischer, but Fischer played something different. Let's look at the beautiful move that Bobby Fischer came up with here. If you want to pause the video and look for it yourself, I'm going to give it now. The move that Fischer came up with is rook d1 to a1. What is this? Well, it will all become clear quite soon. Fischer wants to push a4 and break through on the queen side. Let's see how the game developed. f7, f6, and there comes a4, and unfortunately the game was over very quickly because here Gadia blundered. He anticipated a4 takes b5, and because of that he played the rook to b8 so that he could take back with the rook. But he had missed that now there's suddenly a tactic. Now white happily will take that bad bishop because he's winning a full rook. Knight takes e7 check, queen takes, queen d5 check with a fork, and after king h8 and queen takes e6, white is simply a full rook up. So after the knight takes e7 move, Gadia resigned and this was a very quick game in 23 moves by Bobby Fischer. Let's go back to that position after that miracle move, rook d1 to a1, and let's see what Herman Groten in his book writes about it. What was the secret of Fischer's solution? White achieved an easy win because he knows how to exploit the advantage of his good knight against a bad bishop. Or rather, White makes use of his knight on the queen side, where the bishop cannot intervene, and therefore, as it were, Black plays with a piece less on that wing. An essential factor with all this was the target constituted by the pawn on b5. This allowed White to stage a quick operation via the a-file. Had the pawn been on b7, then it would not have been so easy for White to make progress on the queen side, although he could also then have worked with the push a2 a4, a4 a5, followed by rook d1 a1, a4, b4, b6. Very instructive, the explanations from Herman Groten, and very instructive, the play of Bobby Fischer. Hope you enjoyed this first video in the Study the Classics series. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to my channel, and I'm looking forward to seeing your comments. This is Rick from Chess to Progress. Thank you for watching.